Welcome to Career Tools. This week, what can I tell my boss about the job I'm leaving for? Part 1. The questions this cast answers are: should I tell my manager about my new job? What should I tell my manager about my new job? When should I tell my manager anything about my new job?
Organizations expect executives and C-suiters to think differently about the company. Much of the focus is on external influences and their impacts to the business. Are you in a role and you're not sure how to take the leap from being a manager to being an executive? Learn how Mark Horstman, co-founder of Manager Tools, can assist. Mark would be happy to provide you with personalized, individual work to support your growth to becoming an executive leader. Contact Maggie on our team. Her email address is maggie@manager-tools.com to learn more.
This topic is one that comes up a lot when we talk to managers about resigning. They ask us about the resigning conversation. They say, what do I say when I resign? And then they say, but what do I say about the job that I'm going to? How much can I say about the job that I'm going to? Or how much should I say about the job that I'm going to? And resigning is pretty straightforward. There's a standard list of things that you say. There's a standard set of wording that you can use. And we have a very long podcast about resigning, not because that conversation is long, but because the process you go through in order to prepare all of the documentation and the process of resigning in order to do it properly and to have a really good handover, that part of it, the preparation, takes a long time, which is why the podcast is so long. But deciding what to say to your manager is much more delicate and much more dependent on a lot of circumstances, including your relationship with your manager.
Sure.
It's much more delicate than that resigning conversation, which is almost just a statement of, I'm resigning, this is my last day. So this cast is longer because we're going to talk about what those different circumstances are and why you may or may not decide to give detail. And then right at the end, we're going to tell you what the detail is. And it's actually not very much, but there's a lot of circumstances in which you wouldn't say anything at all. And we're going to talk about those things first. And if you hit any of those things, then you wouldn't say anything at all. And you wouldn't ever get to the end when we tell you to say something.
So kind of don't do this unless, these criteria, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Because we're always so focused on behavioral guidance. And in this case, it almost could seem like, oh, we're not going to tell you till the end. In fact, every bit of this is a little bit like a checkbox of yes or no.
Yes,
so it is
exactly
how to behave. Yeah.
Don't do this. Just don't pass go until you've checked all the boxes as yes, essentially.
There's also the relationship piece with your manager about how does that play into what you're going to say and what your relationship is going to be like after you've resigned. Okay, so 6 parts today. First, you don't do this when you resign. Second, don't say anything until you've resigned and your resignation has been accepted. Third, do not say anything until you've accepted an offer and have a start date. Fourth, do not say anything if you could be wooed back. Fifth, do not say anything if you don't think your present firm can be trusted. And 6, how to tell them and what to tell them. Okay, so don't do this when you resign, y'all. This conversation is not the same as resigning.
Yes. And it could happen fairly quickly afterwards, but it's not. We just want to be really clear. This is a separate conversation. This is 2 parts. Even if they happen at the same time in the same room with the same 2 people, it's 2 parts and there's 2 considerations going on. You have to resign. You have to have the conversation where you say, I am resigning. This is my last day. I'm leaving the building. You don't have to have this conversation. And this conversation comes with a whole set of considerations. And this conversation can go a number of ways. So it can be a really relaxed conversation. It could be one where your manager is literally asking out of curiosity, out of care, out of just wanting to know how you are and where you're going, and just wanting to know that you're doing the best thing for you. It could be a more pointed conversation. If there's a really strong sense of competition in your industry, if there's some really strong competitor whose office is across town from you, and your company has been hemorrhaging staff to that company, they've been poaching your staff, you've been losing customers to them, particularly if you're in sales or there's some kind of, you've got a list of customers who are consultancy. This happens sometimes where customers particularly focus on an individual in a company. That might be a very pointed conversation where the manager is actually trying to find out, are you going to that company? Did they come and poach you? Are you breaking some kind of NDA or some kind of contract that you've signed with that company? So it could be one of those two extremes, or it could be something in the middle.
Yeah, I think it's easy to imagine it being negative, especially now when we're recording this. There's kind of a tight labor market with a series of kind of interesting points to it, I suppose, would be one way to say it without us describing all of that. And so probably people are thinking of this as, oh, this is a conversation that's fraught with emotions and things like that. And it doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes when you resign, it's truly because you're going somewhere that's wonderful for you or your family, or, it's a better fit. And if that's the case, and you've been working with this manager and they're a good manager, I could imagine it going really in a positive way of, oh my goodness, we're so excited for you and for your family. And there's always some sadness. I think even when it is a positive thing, maybe the sadness is a little bit bigger, but it is definitely the case where, like when I resigned to come here, right?
Yeah.
I resigned and they were very, very kind about, oh my gosh, we'd love for you to stay. And of course, my relationships here were so strong that when I explained where I was going later, it was very clear to them that I wasn't coming back, that it was this, personal kind of like reason for coming to this role. And they were so, so nice. And my relationships there are intact and lovely. And the people that I used to work with are fantastic. And it just doesn't have to always be fraught. So there's just something to consider, that this conversation really could be positive. It also could be, rife with some of these considerations about, are you going to take your contacts with you? Are you going to take your relationships with you? Are you going to take other people? Because maybe you have a lot of good relationships now and those people might follow you, which does happen, right? If a good manager leaves, sometimes people go with them.
If you have a particularly close peer, often
peers
will go with them.
Oh, good call.
You can, software development teams, sometimes one goes and you can lose 8 software developers in 3 months and a whole team will go.
It's so funny because you're absolutely right. And I guess I should have said, hi, everyone. I'm Kate Braun. I'm one of our managing partners, and I don't often get to record with Wendy. So I'm here today recording with Wendy. I'm so excited. And it's funny you mentioned software because I used to be in aerospace, particularly the governmental contracting portion of it. And I talk a lot to my former peers and colleagues. And when we talk about the aerospace industry, because it is so small, we say about the aerospace industry that they eat their own young.
Yes.
Because there's this kind of, if you're at a big aerospace industry company, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, all these places, there's a cycle. You might be aware of a cycle that I've seen a lot where people kind of go from like one of the bigger places to one of the, what used to be the startup places. They're not anymore. Let's be honest, y'all, SpaceX is no longer a startup. And sometimes that tenure ends with them coming back to the mothership. Yes. So we always talk about aerospace, they eat their own young, which is a very gross saying that is really accurate about that industry and software to an extent as well. So if your manager wants to have a conversation about this, which is, again, separate from resigning is almost a mechanics piece, right? You have to resign and then they might want to have a conversation. There could be a lot of different reasons they want to have this conversation. So you need to be careful about what you say. even if you think you understand why they want to know and what their motivations are for the conversation, you really could be wrong, of course, which is always true. In a delicate situation like this one, though, it pays to be careful, even if you have a good guess, right? Let's be aware that even if we do have a good guess, this conversation is still going to be kind of not recorded or, documented, but kind of written in the ledger of your, what I would consider like the things that people talk about when you come and go from an organization.
Yes. And losing a member of staff when you don't want to is one of the things that is a black mark against managers, And so it's possible that their manager, their boss has said, well, you go find out why they're leaving.
Sure.
And your boss has to come back with something that sounds reasonable. And so they have to ask for more detail than they want to, or in a more pointed way than they want to. So even if you think your boss is supportive of you going somewhere where you can learn some new skills and would accept that reason, their boss might not. So it might not even be their motivation for the question.
Oh, you're so right. Yes. Okay. I'm not going to I won't make a rabbit hole for us. Sometimes I dig little rabbit holes and then I go shoop, straight down them. Okay. We're not going to do that because today we're going to focus on the details of the job that you're going to and anything that you've learned that might be a competitive advantage to your current firm. And that's probably not what most people are thinking about when, we start talking about things in this cast. I think a lot of people are so focused on the emotions of resigning, the emotions of the manager they're leaving. They forget that the details of the job that you're going to might be creating competitive advantage for the firm that you're leaving. So while it could seem benign, knowing, for example, that your competitor is hiring people with a particular skill set onto a specific product, for example, maybe, or project, gives your company the knowledge or the idea about the future plans of the other company. If I know people are hiring for what appears to be lithium ion battery work, maybe that tells me that they're trying to enter a new portion of the industry, things like that.
Every day this week, it's May 2023. Every day this week, there has been a news report about which companies have job adverts for AI engineers in which departments. Every day. Because that tells us which companies are going to put AI in which parts of their companies. Because it's a competitive advantage to know that. And that is moving the stock of companies. So just knowing which companies are hiring in which departments for which skills is enough to move the stock.
It has been enough for me to start to understand what AI can be capable of.
Mm-hmm.
There are things that AI, genuinely, I did not imagine that AI would assist with. And you shared with me the things about how AI can help with groceries. I am imagining that 6 months ago, companies like Instacart hired AI engineers because they thought to themselves, oh my gosh, this is something that our organization can use. And if you knew that, you might say, oh, wow, Instacart is on the bleeding edge of grocery delivery.
Exactly.
We're not here to talk about groceries, although maybe I should have had more breakfast. Okay, so it could be competitive advantage knowing where you're going to go, where you're going to be working, what customers, what systems. All of the things that you're excited about and that you probably want to tell somebody about are things that might give your current company information that they may not have been privy to otherwise. So you could be creating sort of a conflict of interest.
Mm-hmm.
That's maybe not the right. I'm sure there's a legal reason or a legal way to use that word that I just violated. So ignore me, y'all, if I didn't use that phrase in exactly the right way.
Yes, probably. But colloquially,
close enough.
I think,
yeah.
Colloquially, conflict of interest is right. And could they find out this information otherwise? Of course they could. But that doesn't mean that you should be the person that lets the cat out of the bag, as it were.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, insider trading, to use another legal term. Oh, wow. Insider trading is illegal for a reason, because it's unfair for one person to have an advantage over others in the market.
Right.
And this situation is less significant.
Right. You're not going to jail. It's
Right.
gonna be okay.
But we assure you can see the parallel, and you want to avoid being the person who transfers that information. Like, you just don't want to be that person. And I also worked for BAE Systems, so similar to you. And one of the things I had to do when I first worked there was go to a session about industrial espionage, because apparently it's rife, and you can be sitting in the pub talking about the work you're doing and somebody is listening, and you never think of that happening, and yet it is. And just that conversation that you want to have, that you're really excited about this new job, is essentially enough. So you just don't want to be that person. And as it was explained to me, you can be talking about something that you're doing in your job that's like some tiny little something, and the person that's listening, that's enough for them to put together with 5 other things they know to make something big.
That's how ideas spark and create, right? And so those small, tiny things even just could give them a different idea. So in this situation, we want you to maintain your ethical obligation to both parties. You have an obligation to your current employer, even after you have left, to support them in achieving their objectives. Equally, you have an obligation to your new employer to help them achieve their objectives. And while we use the word competitive about companies, and we think of that meaning that there is a zero-sum game happening, that's not really an accurate representation of reality. It's absolutely possible for both teams, both companies essentially, to achieve their objectives, and for you to support both companies in doing that. Supporting one doesn't mean undermining the other. If you can't see your way through supporting both, then at least hopefully we can help you see this as not acting in a way that's detrimental to your previous company.
Yeah, just don't do something that's,
Right. And of course, there's more than one thing to consider. We've got a few parameters here. The world is a really small place, and there's no advantage, really, in poking anybody in the eye. So think about your network, because when we talk about your network, we talk about how valuable all of the people in it are. The people on your previous team are really likely to be helpful to you in the future. Almost, maybe I would suggest even more so than the other people in your network, because the relationships are stronger especially if you maintain them, not at the same level, just at a level that keeps them in your network. So just as there's never any need, there's definitely no need now to be rude or obnoxious when you tell them or don't tell them about your new job, because you want to have good relationships here, and then you want to have good relationships in the new team, which means not having told secrets to your old team that they would rather you have kept to yourself.
And we say this right at the end, so we'll say it now, so that if you've got here and you're thinking, well, what am I going to say to them? You can just say, I don't know, or I haven't been told that, or I'm not sure yet. The truth is, you don't know and you're not sure yet, because a lot of the time you only know what you've been told in 2 interviews, and that's not very much. Usually an interview of an hour is 55 minutes of you talking and 5 minutes of them telling you about the job. So you usually don't know very much. So you can just say, I don't know yet.
You don't even realize how much your communication style is a deeply ingrained habit. 75% of the time, at work, your natural style actually gets in your way. At the Virtual Effective Communicator Conference, we'll teach you how to see other styles and, in turn, adapt your own. Our next session of the Virtual Effective Communicator Conference is coming up on June the 12th, and we'd love to have you join us. Register today at manager-tools.com/training.
So that was all. Don't have this conversation when you resign, and why. The next thing is, don't say anything until you have resigned and your resignation has been accepted. So if you are going to have a conversation, don't have this conversation until you've actually resigned and your resignation has been accepted. So that's two parts. If you've put your resignation in and nobody has said, yes, we've accepted it, or we understand you're leaving, then don't start talking about your new job.
Because there are no secrets.
Mm-mm.
We've said this is kind of a manager tools truism. In a company, there are no secrets. The moment that you have told one person, you might as well have told everybody. Even if you tell one person one thing, it's like telling everybody everything. Even when you haven't told anyone anything. People are drawing conclusions from your behavior, what you wear, what appointments you're going to, what's written in your calendar. They're aware. And any shift in that indicates to them something that they might then talk about with somebody else. And then people guess. It's almost worse when people guess. So
I guess it's easier now. A lot of people are remote working, because it used to be that you'd come into the office in a suit when you didn't normally wear a suit, and everybody would say, oh, you're going for an interview today? Or you'd have like 4 dental appointments in 3 weeks, and everybody would say, are you interviewing? Like, everyone would be instantly suspicious. When you're remote working, it's easier for you to get away with that. But still, even if you have unavailable on your calendar, or you Slack people and say, hey, I'm away from my desk for a bit, people start to draw conclusions, and they're never good conclusions, right? They're always like, oh, you're going back to bed, aren't you? So
yeah.
But saying something specific about a new job before you've resigned or before your resignation has been accepted puts in motion machinations that cannot work out positively for you. So, for example, your manager hears that you've been interviewing, or assumes that you've been interviewing, or thinks that you've been interviewing, or thinks that you're unhappy. And so he goes to his manager and HR and gets permission to give you a counteroffer, or an offer of a raise, or, some increased conditions. And now you're in an awkward position because you have to turn the counteroffer down. Now,
we've talked about this before.
You might be surprised by have to. We always recommend you turn counteroffers down, and we have a cost for that. But basically, if you are unhappy in a job, or you want something else, more money doesn't solve the problem. And a counteroffer is nearly always more money. It's very rarely anything else. And if it is a promise of something else, that promise is never, yeah, we'll make you a whatever you want. We'll make you a senior developer, and it'll happen in 6 months, and then it doesn't happen in 6 months, and you're still unhappy, but the extra money hasn't made up for the fact that you're still not a senior developer, and you're still unhappy, and you still want to leave. So counteroffers don't help. When I was a recruiter, anybody who got a counteroffer was back in 3 months saying, I still want to leave, every time. So your manager has gone to his manager and HR, got a favor in order to get a counteroffer, burned 2 favors to get this counteroffer, and then you've said no. So now your manager is mad at you because you're leaving. He's burnt the favors, and he's got a black mark because someone he wanted to stay is leaving. All because he got this impression, or he heard, or you told him that you were getting a new job before you actually resigned.
Yeah. So be careful with that. And the other thing that could happen, if you're not careful, is that you could be asked to leave early. And this is more common in very competitive areas, such as sales, or any area where individuals have a book of business. We told you before, we don't think it's a good idea to make a job change, except when you can control the timing. There's really no benefit when the company controls the timing, and there's only benefits when you do. But being asked to leave early messes with your plans, and it's embarrassing, honestly, too. Instead of being able to leave in the controlled, professional, dignified way that you wanted to, you have to leave in a rushed way out the back door. It's awkward, surprise. Not cool. It's also not cool to come home to your partner or spouse in that situation. Having seen it happen, it's not great.
No.
There's that.
Yes.
We don't want people to get the impression beforehand, and then then we communicate, right? So when you communicate that you've resigned and that you're going to a new job, you get to decide what details are said to whom and when. You really can't control what happens after that, though. So word will spread, the message will be corrupted. It's like that ultimate game of telephone, which is totally human nature. It's different, though, if word gets out before you have a chance to control the message, because then someone else is communicating something other than what you want to say at a timing other than what you would want that to be.
Exactly.
They say it, they say the wrong thing, and they say it early or not at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
2 thumbs down.
Yeah, it's like when the company wants to make an announcement and it's leaked in the press first. It never sounds the way they wanted it to sound. Mm-hmm. A company put out an announcement yesterday, and I read the headline and I put it on our Slack channel and said, hey, this is the headline and this is my snarky response to it. And they obviously put out the press release and they said what they wanted to say, but my instant response was I read the negative into it because I would. And it's kind of like that, even when you put out something positive, somebody's going to read something snarky into it. But if that had been leaked, it would have gone out with my kind of reading of it, because that's the way it is. And one of the differences between individual contributors and managers and directors is that managers think about the message, about what's being said, about how it's being said, about the timing of what's being said and what that means. And they think about what people will read between the lines. That's why you get company announcements, or you get an announcement in a staff meeting when you know something's been thought about for weeks, and you know something's been planned for weeks, and yet you don't hear about it until a staff meeting or until an all-hands meeting, and everybody's told together in a certain way with some slides where the words are specific or a statement is read. It's because they want the message to come out in a very specific way. And that's what we're encouraging you to do here, to think about what will be read between the lines if you don't control the communication.
When we say to wait until your resignation has been accepted, I want to be clear that there's actually no such thing in the corporate world as not accepting a resignation. Unlike in the armed forces, no one actually comes after you and forces you to come back to work if they don't accept your resignation. And if someone has said that your resignation is not accepted, or that you have some legal obligation that you need to stay and see out, or there is some other indication that they're going to make leaving the company difficult, then you do not want to trust those people with information about your new job or your new company. So if you go to them and you say, hey, I'm resigning, and they say, oh, no, you're not, then we're not going to tell them. We recommend you don't tell them anything about where you're going and what you'll be doing when you get there.
And we've given you a lot to think about in this part, and we'll be back next week with 3 more things to think about before we tell you what to tell them.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Wendy.
Thanks, Kate. We'll be back next week with the second half of this cast. Bye, everyone.